I believe it is time to, quote, get the facts about Twitter and other social media platforms targeting their bias against President Trump and conservatives online. If we were to judge the bias of Twitter and its top employees by their own words, the case would be an easy one to make. Twitter's head of site integrity has tweeted that there are, quote, actual Nazis in the White House, and no fact check label was ever applied to this absolutely outrageous, offensive, and false claim made against the White House and its employees. But let's judge Twitter based on their actions, not based on the words of its top employees, and its actions are no better. President Trump recently received a so-called fact check label for a tweet. It was a false fact check and an accurate fact check, but nevertheless, Twitter moved forward with it. Dan Scavino, the deputy chief of staff here, was the first user in the history of Twitter to receive a so-called, quote, manipulated media label for posting a video that played a verbatim clip. It is no coincidence that these two unbelievable interventions by Twitter were targeted against the President of the United States and one of the President's top advisors. This is bias in action. And while big tech is quick to censor the President, quick to censor some of his top employees, they are very reluctant, it seems, to label some of the actions by Chinese officials, some of the misinformation that has been spread by China. For example, to move off of Twitter and move to Google, they created a search engine for the Chinese Communist Party, which blacklisted searches for human rights and allowed for easy surveillance. Facebook and Twitter have both taken paid advertising that spread disinformation about China's mass imprisonment of religious minorities, and Twitter has allowed Chinese officials to use its platforms to spread misinformation about the coronavirus, undermine the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, and more. And then back in March, a Chinese official began spreading a conspiracy theory on Twitter, an egregious one, that our U.S. military was responsible for the spread of the coronavirus. And that tweet, that disinformation, it took all the way until today when we raised concerns about it to get a fact check. So they appear to be very hastily eager to censor President Trump and some of his employees, but a little posts are protected. And finally, I just want to note one other action of Twitter that I learned just before walking out here, that on the Mueller report, their anti-Trump headlines were anti-Trump by a ratio of 76-1. That's extraordinary, and it's not just bias aimed at President Trump and his employees. It's also aimed at everyday Americans. It's aimed at the movie Unplanned, as Twitter suspended their account and then came up with an excuse in the aftermath. And then just another example, that liberals are allowed to incite violence against the Covington kids, who were in the end proven right, and their video was taken out of context, and yet these individuals were allowed by Twitter to incite violence. It's very disturbing to see. So those are some of the president's concerns, and with that, I will take questions.
And on Twitter, shouldn't the president be fact-checked, especially this president who has made so many false and misleading statements that it has put, fact checkers to work across the world? I mean, he's uttered some 18,000 false or misleading statements, according to the Washington Post. If there's any president out there who should be fact-checked, any political leader out there should be fact-checked, isn't it President Trump? And aren't you trying to silence fact-checking by going after Twitter like this?
Look, well, first I would say I disagree with all, if not almost all, of those assertions that you're making there, because, look, if you're going to get into the fact-checking business, there's no one that should be fact-checked more than the mainstream media that has been continually wrong about a number of things. To give you a list of some of the most egregious ones, that ABC News in December of 2017 falsely reported that Flynn would testify that the president directed him during the campaign to make contact with the Russians. That was false. In 2017, your network CNN botched their WikiLeaks email exclusive and were forced to make on-air corrections. CNN's Jem Sciutto, another CNN one, dropped a fictional bombshell in 2018, July, claiming that Michael Cohen would tell federal investigators that the president knew of the Trump Tower meeting. And there are many more, not to just put the onus on CNN there. So if anyone needs to be fact-checked, I think it should be the media.
There are news outlets that make mistakes from time to time. We own up to those mistakes. We correct those mistakes.
Not always. I have many you guys haven't owned up to, I could get to.
We do on a regular basis. The president never owns up to any of his false or misleading statements or outright lies. You have pledged in this briefing room to never lie to the American people. Are you saying that the President of the United States has never lied to the public before?
I'm around the president. His intent is always to give truthful information to the American people. And you mentioned that the media apologizes for their mistruths. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at other headlines in the New York Times saying there aren't enough ventilators to cope with the coronavirus. In fact, we had an excess of ventilators we've shipped around the world. Washington Post, U.S. health system is showing why it's not ready for a coronavirus pandemic. We were ready. There's many more I could get to. On the coronavirus specifically, I could spend the time going through these, but I don't think that's what the American people want to hear. Yes.
Another matter in regards to what you said in your statement, in regards to the executive order, I realize it hasn't come out yet, and I realize we haven't seen the language, but we have seen reports. I work for Fox, and we've seen reports that it relates to the Section 230, the Communications Decency Act. And interestingly enough, former Vice President Joe Biden has also called for the repeal of Section 230. He says that it should be revoked immediately. But as you know, an executive order does not trump the law. An executive order can't, for instance, repeal the law. It can't in any way amend the law. So what would be the intent behind this executive order without getting ahead of what the president intends to sign?
Yeah, I don't want to get ahead of that, but the one thing I will say more broadly, you referenced that section, I think that would be included in what I'm about to say. There are various shields in place that essentially shield some of these social media companies and allow them to censor conservative users, and we're not able to see what happens behind those shields. That section was one of those shields you mentioned, so we're looking at ways to remove those shields to shed some light on what is happening and some of the decision making behind the scenes. That's generally and broadly the idea, but I won't get ahead on any specific announcements that should come hopefully before 5 p.m. John.
Kelly, I want to